Hi everyone, I'm Sud. Welcome to Hiring Diaries, the definitive resource for best practices for hiring managers and HR and recruiting professionals in Asia. Today, our guest is Tushar. Tushar is the head of healthcare and life sciences practice at Page Executive Southeast Asia, which is a part of the PageGroup. He's responsible for leading and growing PageGroup's healthcare and life sciences practice across Southeast Asia, focusing on C suite, executive, and senior level searches in this space. He's been a part of the Page Group since 2014, where he grew to lead the healthcare and life sciences practices for India before moving to Singapore. A very warm welcome to you, Tushar. So let's start by getting to know you. Tushar, tell us what is it that you do at Page Group?
Sure. Thanks, Sud. Thanks for having me. What I do at PageGroup, I lead our healthcare and life sciences practice, like you mentioned, but I'm responsible for growing our entire healthcare and life sciences presence across Southeast Asia. So that's Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, and the Philippines. I'm based in Singapore, and my day job is basically helping organizations hire the right talent at C-suite and executive level.
That's great to hear. So, when you mentioned so many countries in a series that you have to be responsible for, would you be able to share maybe some stories of how you've observed cultural differences across these markets when you're recruiting?
I think that's the most important thing as a recruiter to actually understand that nuance because when I moved even from India to Singapore, the market was very different. You had to get used to client expectations, candidate expectations. I think in India, you could have gotten away with being more aggressive with certain candidates. In Singapore, you can't. You have to give them their space. Um, and while those differences are there across these six markets in Southeast Asia, there's a lot more in common as well because I think these countries are fairly close to each other. So there are a lot of cultural commonalities in terms of how interviews are done, how candidates approach interviews as well. But then again, there is also marked difference in how slightly more mature markets from a recruitment standpoint, such as Singapore and Malaysia, vis-a-vis a Philippines or a Thailand or a Vietnam, which are still slightly, I would say, coming up to terms in terms of how you scale up the recruitment market there. So candidates in Singapore and Malaysia are much more aware. They know exactly what to say to a recruiter. They know exactly what to say in interviews. Whereas in the other markets, sometimes you may have to coach candidates to sort of get them to best highlight their achievements in an.
Okay, yeah, that sounds very interesting. How was just jumping to a slightly adjacent topic, since a lot of the people in Singapore that you'd be talking to have moved from somewhere else. What has your experience been like, especially in the early days when you moved from India to here? You would have been leading the practice in India, and here you sort of had to take the same responsibility and deliver fast. How did you build your network? How did you get to a more productive state quickly?
Yeah, I think one thing I realized was that I can't really be taking it easy. Singapore is a much more developed and mature market from a recruitment standpoint. I think the benefit that I had was I was working in the same industry with Page Group in India. So there was a lot of carry forward momentum that I could bring in terms of knowing the industry. There were already people that I knew in the region. It was really about leveraging those relationships, right? But then what I always go back to is that you get taken seriously as a healthcare and life sciences recruiter in Southeast Asia if you really know your stuff, right? So that could either be the industry or the candidate market that your potential client might want to hear about, right? I didn't have on day one the knowledge about candidates, so I relied heavily on my industry knowledge, speaking to clients and interfacing with them, telling them what their competitors were doing, what other organizations are doing from a hiring perspective. So that was important, and then gradually meet more and more candidates because that's the only way you can get a lay of the land. That is, if you speak to people who are operating in that space, and then started creating a mental map on who fits in where, which organizations are what size,
Yeah.
and then of course put that into our CRM or our database, and then have more refined and more data backed conversations with clients.
So you lean on your expertise to build your credibility first and then grow from there. So I really like that. I think that's great advice for anyone moving into a new segment, new industry, even a new market. What do you think drew you to the healthcare and life sciences industry right at the start? I remember you were in the media industry before, and then you moved into recruiting. and then in a very specialized area. So tell us about that story.
I think the move from journalism was I wouldn't say easy, but I think I wanted to do something different, and I saw there would be a decent amount of human interaction and interface in recruitment consulting as well, and that's how I got introduced to PageGroup, and that's how I joined. Why I chose healthcare? I'd like to think it was a lot of my decision. Unfortunately, it wasn't, but I'm glad it wasn't, because what I've seen with healthcare is that it's much more recession proof, as the last 2 years have taught us. While the industry may not grow at the same space as a tech or financial services or crypto for that matter, it is far more stable, right? So it's far more resilient to recessions, it's far more resilient to business downturns. So once I got aligned to that, that's something that I realized, and I wanted to continue to build my knowledge in that space, because it's also very specialized. You can create that niche for yourself and become credible, because healthcare is still a pretty archaic topic for a lot of people. They don't really find it interesting. So I felt being more niche might actually help in me being able to represent myself better in the market.
Do you think that has had something to do with your success in the recruiting industry, just specializing in that area?
I think specialization helps, definitely. I'm always a big believer that be, an inch wide but a mile deep, instead of the other way, instead of being just an mile wide but an inch deep, right? I genuinely believe in specificity, specializing in something, because you really know your stuff. And the job that we do in recruitment is a lot about interfacing with clients, understanding what their needs are, telling them what's there in the market, but at the same time speaking to a lot of candidates as well, and helping them make the right decisions for their careers, right? They're trusting us with a lot of responsibility, right? So
Yeah.
actually having conversations where you come across as a trusted partner to both sides are the people who I feel are most successful. And how you can be a trusted partner is really by knowing the industry, by knowing your market, by knowing the specializations. And by knowing specializations, I don't just mean knowing who's going where, but just a broad sense of
Mm.
where the market is headed, how the market is changing, what skills could be in demand, what skills are organizations really competing over, so that you are then able to tell or guide conversations in those directions, right? You can tell a candidate who's in really high demand to maybe ask for more money, right? If you feel that his skill set is niche, but at the same time, you could be telling your client as well that you need to probably reduce or increase your budget depending on what skill set you want to hire. So I think it cuts both ways, and it really helps.
So basically, knowing what you're doing and building that credibility over time through your expertise, through your attitude of being a partner, that's really helped. Where do you see technology play a role in the recruitment industry? Just jumping from there, and whether that has played a role in continuing success of the industry.
I think it may make my job redundant in 10 years, the way we're going, technology, right? But no, definitely a lot has, even since I joined the industry 7 years ago, right? A lot has changed. We look at application tracking systems now that are far more efficient in terms of making sure that the right candidates are being tracked. You have recruitment software now being developed that really reads resumes. It reduces a lot of the operational time that recruiters have to spend in screening or going through every. I remember when I joined, I had to look at every resume bit by bit and then really reject or approve, right? Now you can actually set in filters when you're searching, where it rejects people basis the number of years of experience, the salary, sometimes even company names, if you're looking after a certain, a certain list of companies, right? So there's a lot that has changed, but I really feel the impact is really more on making operational stuff for recruiters much more easier, but also reducing hiring timelines, right? Once you reduce that operational speed, you're able to go back to your clients in 2 days instead of three, makes them happy. They're able to push forward timelines as well. So I think the knock on effect is really on organizations being able to hire talent sooner and in a more efficient manner, which really is what every company tries to do, but it's not
Yeah.
always successful at, right? Because for some reason or the other. And then if I even delve further into that, I think just organizations being able to, like I mentioned earlier, track candidates, being able to really then use that HR analytics piece to really look at what sort of hiring processes they need to develop, right? Or what are the hiring processes that they need to improve on to make sure candidate feedback is being taken on board. Um, And yeah, so that's broadly it.
Yeah, you spoke about the benefits of using technology and operationally it having helped. What are some of the areas where technology really promised something but hasn't really helped that much?
Ooh. I think CRMs. I'm not sure. I think mostly most CRMs are able to sort of cope. I don't think there's a specialized recruitment CRM. I may get bashed by a lot of CRM companies for saying this, right? But I generally feel even the system that we used to use earlier, while we use a far more advanced system now, the matrices on which it's evaluated is still more or less the same. The engine remains the same. There have just been a few added values that have been done, right? So I don't really know. I'm not an expert in technology, and I think there are people who are far more qualified, have spent more years in recruitment, who could tell, the viewers in terms of what really has been disappointing from a technology standpoint. But I'm happy to think about it.
I've been I've been reading about some of the things you've written. You've clearly established yourself as a specialist in this field. This article you wrote recently on the relationship between contract pharma and the pharmaceutical industry. You spoke about how this has helped manufacture more, COVID-19 vaccines. Do you think that has saved more people in the world? How do you think about that evolving relationship?
So I love writing. I'm a trained journalist, right? So I'm actually glad I got to write on this topic. So I think the topic mostly goes into just, how do I say, analyzing the relationship and how the pandemic has actually accelerated that relationship between contract development manufacturing organizations, which I think in layman terms, we can call it as outsourcing the manufacturing process or outsourcing certain steps of the manufacturing process to a different organization so that you can produce more because you have more facilities producing a certain type of product, which was exactly the need during the pandemic, right? So I think plugging that gap between scientific development and what actually humanity wanted, I think was very important. And my article really looked at how a lot of companies, even competitors, have signed up with another organization to sort of manufacture products, right? So, for example, Novartis was manufacturing certain vaccines or was completing the last stage of vaccine production for the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines in its facility in Switzerland. Ordinarily, you wouldn't expect these companies to be working together, right? But the situation so demanded because we had to get billions of vaccines out that you rely on unprecedented and, how do I say this, untested ways of how you can really look at increasing production capacity, right? And I think this particular last year or so might have really changed the complete dynamic because now there is far more trust on contract manufacturing organizations, and to your point, definitely saved lives, right? Because imagine if we were in a situation where every organization was limited to the production capabilities that it had without any technology transfer. There are only a finite number that it could have produced, right? There's still only a finite number that we can produce now, but that number is far greater, right? So 100% it would have resulted in people's lives being saved, which is what everybody's been trying to do for the last 2 years.
Definitely. And I think it gives a much larger and more tangible, clearly tangible meaning to what you do. And just going from there, right, was this a crazy time for you, given that so much demand would have been created for more manufacturing? How did you cope with the demand for talent in delivering what this industry needed to deliver?
I think I'm still coping, honestly. And I think it's safe to say it's still a employer-driven market at the moment. I think candidates at the moment are not shy or afraid of saying no if they don't feel certain offers are up to mark. And I feel, for example, if a candidate had 10 points on the basis of which he or she would evaluate an offer, in previous times we would say, okay, if you get 7 out of 10, take it. Now they're probably considering 9 out of 10, so they're very picky, right? They know that they're in demand again, right? So it's created a lot of issues where we have candidates actually going through the interview process but then offers being rejected, right? Which of course then, if we don't have backups in place, puts the recruitment cycle back by around 2 to 3 months. Not ideal for us as a business, not ideal for clients because they want these people as soon as possible. And of course, the manufacturing hub that is Singapore from a medical and devices from a medical device and pharmaceutical standpoint has only grown. I think even when we were in the peak of the pandemic, 2020, whenever the government would release its numbers, I think manufacturing for healthcare was the only industry that was going up, while all other industries were declining heavily, right? So that is, again, I think put into focus sharply that healthcare can be a real cornerstone for a country to build its economy and its business ecosystem around, which Singapore did 20 25 years around, made it uh, very easy for pharmaceutical companies to set up processes here, to set up manufacturing facilities here. And then, there's obviously been a great benefit. And we're continuing to see that demand for talent where, we struggle sometimes to fill some pretty niche roles in on the manufacturing side.
You mentioned this being an employee-driven market, and I think we're seeing that across a lot of industries, maybe not just healthcare. Every industry that I look at, whether it be tech, whether it be manufacturing, whether it be even blue-collar roles, it's becoming more and more of an employee-driven market. Where do you think this is going, and what do you think is going to happen?
I just hope it's not a bubble. That's all I hope. I think there will be some leveling off, definitely, because I think what we need to understand is that there was pent up demand in the market for the last 1.5 years, which couldn't really be exercised because of the pandemic, right? Um, and now you're looking to hire all those positions because business needs, while they were readjusted for 2020, they weren't really readjusted that much for 2021, and definitely not for 2022 because the world is opening up, right? So that pent up demand still needs to be filled up, or those roles still need to be filled up. So we will continue to see more and more positions being opened. I think more and more candidates being approached. Uh, but then I think on the other side, the question really arises is that there will be some leveling off, like I mentioned, right? You can't continue at this rate as much as I would love to, right? As much as recruitment companies would have been having record years, record quarters, maybe this year. Uh, I think there will be some decrease, but still that puts again a lot of focus into what sort of roles you want to specialize in, because you don't want a situation where you're just riding the wave, and when that wave sort of decreases, then you don't have anything to fall back on. So creating, I think, a sustainable business that will do really well when the market is doing well is great, but will continue to do well even when the market levels off or plateaus. I think that's most important.
What do you see employers doing to deal with this? So, I mean, you mentioned that companies are keeping a bigger pipeline, and of course, you are helping
Yeah.
your clients keeping a larger pipeline. Apart from maybe salaries going up because there's, excess demand, are you seeing any innovative approaches or any different approaches from companies in making sure that candidates convert?
Yeah, I think interview feedback has become very important. I think it's really come to the fore that organizations are really now asking even candidates who are not being taken forward into the process, that how their experience was, what they learned from it, how were the conversation with hiring managers, because you are trying to focus really more on the qualitative aspect now. I think a lot of feedback is now being given to hiring managers as well in terms of how they can improve interview processes, what coaching can be given. That's definitely one. And I think remote hiring has definitely been one of the key things, right? We've really looked at, fine, we want to hire a person in country A, we can't hire, okay, just put them in country B. I think that's really picked up as well. And I think more organizations are realizing if they don't have an office in a certain country, uh, do we really need to open up an office in a different country? We still need to hire the person, but can we hire them as an employer of record? Can we hire them as a contractor? And I think that really has changed how organizations are viewing talent, right? So again, brings, I think, into focus the mobility of talent globally as well in healthcare, which is still a very niche market where again you have more jobs than you have candidates, right? So I think organizations are doing that.
Yeah, I think clearly that's why probably we're seeing so many unicorns come up in this space, EOR
Yeah.
and PEO space. I think it's really helping smoothen a lot of I guess, a lot of the talent mobility. Um, when we spoke, some months ago, we got into this conversation of areas where technology doesn't really help. So, for example, if I
Hmm.
remember correctly, what we were talking about is so going back to the earlier technology discussion we had,
Hmm.
we talked about how technology cannot really help to evaluate, senior candidates because that takes a nuance, takes a lot of experience. What does it take in your mind to evaluate someone for a senior role? Have you developed any framework over time that helps you?
Yeah, and I think yeah. So thanks for bringing that up. I don't know, it slipped my mind, but 100% agree that that initial evaluation you can't leave that to a system. It has to be done because you are evaluating not only on commercial acumen but behaviors as well. And to link it back to your previous question, I think culture is also becoming more and more important, right? So candidate could do the job, but if he's going to upset the apple cart culturally, most organizations are going to steer away from that, right? They want somebody who can not only do the job but fit into the values of the organization as well, right? So I use two approaches when I'm evaluating candidates. One is when I'm evaluating them on an active basis when they have a job or I have a job for them, and one is on a passive basis, right? So or when I'm just meeting them in the hope of getting them a job in 6 months, or they're more passive in their search, right? When I'm on the active side, I think it's very important to, how do I say this, not gauge them through the prism of the job that they're applying for, because they will alter answers or change answers to come across as the best qualified person for that job. Your job as a recruiter and a client partner has to remove that bias and evaluate them completely on as though they were a passive job seeker. And if they were a passive job seeker, would they still make sense for this job, right? So I think I'm a big believer of the STAR methodology, where candidates can run me through situations, tasks, actions, and results. I think that shows structure, that shows a methodology, and that also shows that they have thought about how they approach problems, right? So problem solving is, I think, the biggest challenge for any organization. So that's what I do. I think on the passive side, it's really to understand motivations, what they're looking for in their next jobs, and then try to marry that into what they could potentially be looking for, because they're far more passive in their search. And if they're more patient, I think you can go back to them with a much more targeted job instead of calling them every week. Yeah, I have a job for you. I have a job for you. It's like selling, right? If you don't know what you're selling against, how can you sell, right? So knowing
Yeah.
your customer or knowing your product, I think is very important. And then you are, of course, able to have, like you mentioned, more nuanced conversations, right? For example, imagine me as a recruiter calling somebody up every week with a job that they are not interested in. That leaves a very bad impression. But if I'm coming back to them once in 3 months with a job that they are perfect for, and they don't then move ahead for it for XYZ reason, they will still really appreciate that, the way I was able to hone in on their experience versus the job, right? So I think that's very important for me, and that's the approach that I use.
So you must have to keep really detailed notes on people.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. More detailed than the
What do your
FBI,
headings look?
probably.
What do the usual headings look like on your notes?
Okay, you're making me give away a lot of industry secrets, but
Okay, maybe
I,
not. Just give me
no, no, no,
maybe
no, no,
one or
no, no.
two.
I think no, no, no. I think behaviors, like I mentioned, is important. I would always sort of anything. So when I'm hiring a commercial role, for example, I will always look for that one or two achievements where they've turned around businesses or scaled up businesses. I think those are important. Highlights are important. Academics, if they have an outstanding academic record, which they've then translated into a really strong career, I think there is considerable, there is considerable track record that an organization can bank on as well. And as well as potential red flags, I think those are important as well. It's always important to identify what a particular candidate is not doing well or doing well, so that your organization or your client is not sort of surprised when they meet them or hear them. And I think I also put in notes on what they need to be coached on. I think it's important because while candidates are great for certain jobs, not everybody can interview well, right? It's still a very unique concept, especially doing it virtually, right? It's even more
Yeah.
difficult to impress someone. So I think coaching them on how they approach interviews, what I think just in terms of etiquette or just basic stuff like asking two or three questions towards the of an end of an interview to ensure that they are to show that they're interested. I think these are some of the things, but yeah.
That's great, actually. That's great advice already. So thanks for sharing that. Um, the related question there, since you referred to remote hiring.
Hmm.
In your own process of evaluating candidates, I'm guessing in the earlier days, 2 years ago, you probably met a lot of candidates in person, and that has its own fidelity of exchange of information, right? You can see how someone's behaving in a lot greater detail, especially when nuances are involved. You can see when people get uncomfortable. You can see when the conversation is just flowing. Uh, have certain things changed? Have certain things gotten harder with being completely remote?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a great question again. So thanks for asking that. Definitely changes a lot of things. When you're a recruitment consultant, you rely heavily on your interface and your ability to influence, right? And at least have that interaction. So that was completely gone when the pandemic started, right? So and I think it's a very Darwinian way of looking at things, but you either adapt or die, right? So you need to evolve. You had to get used to being able to interview candidates online, being able to maybe even sometimes get them offers without having to meet them, right? Me and a lot of my colleagues would ordinarily not get someone an offer unless we met them face to face, because would you trust a salesman who you've not met face to face? No, right?
I mean,
So
yeah.
you wouldn't, right? Honestly. So I think I wouldn't. So how can I expect that I do the same thing? So I think that was very important. A lot of people struggled with it, and you had to pivot very quickly. What could be done differently? You can't really do much. You can only ask the same questions. It did make things slightly more difficult, but I think candidates also realize that there is a sincerity, that this person is taking the time out to get onto a video call, and any insights being shared are actually helping them in finding their job that could potentially change their life, right? So yeah, but I think that ability to really meet and influence was pretty difficult for the first 1.5 years of the pandemic.
Any key tips you have for people, especially, it actually brings me to the last question, and maybe you can cover some tips there. Any advice for recruiting professionals who are earlier in their career, especially given the challenges of doing all of this remotely?
I genuinely don't know if I'm the one who should be giving advice. I'm usually the one taking it from seniors at my organization. I think the number one thing would be to, just like any career, join it for the right reasons. I think just joining it for money or because recruitment looks glamorous is wrong. If you're honestly passionate about what you do, passionate about changing people's lives, passionate about helping your clients or solving their problems, that will shine through in the sincerity of the work, right? But to join it for money or because there are, you can go out for drinks with clients, I think those are completely the wrong reasons, right? Um, and I think the other point really relates to being resilient in what you do, because I think recruitment, a lot of people don't understand that days can be very bad. When days are good, they're great, but when they're bad, you want to dig a massive hole and just jump right through into the center of the earth. So you don't. So you need to be very resilient. You really need to buckle up. You really need to get ready for the ride. But even then, nothing will prepare you. So not give up, and the ability to, I would say, being able to bounce back is something which is most important for any, I don't know, am I allowed to say young? I don't think I'm that old myself, but yeah, for any younger recruiters out there.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. And one of the things you just mentioned in passing, right? You're the one usually taking advice. I think that itself is great advice, to have that attitude. I think early in your career you need that attitude, because this is a it's not like anybody teaches you how to be a recruiter, right? There's no school for this. You're learning on the job. It's almost tribalized learning that you can get from mentors. So I think that by itself, there was good advice embedded in that. So I really like that. Tushar, thanks so much for being on the show. It's been amazing talking to you, even without having, even if we weren't recording this, I would have loved to talk to you about all of this stuff. So really appreciate you making time for this.
No worries. Thanks. Appreciate you letting me share my thoughts, and love speaking to you as well.